George Weimer made friends wherever he went. An outgoing and quirky presence, George meant so many things to so many people. George left this world on June 10th, 2015. The world is a little dimmer without him.
George Weimer Jr. was born on November 6, 1931, to Jane and George Weimer Sr. He would talk about how hard his parents worked to raise him and his siblings. That upbringing would lead him down many paths and eventually bring him to the University of Mount Union. He received his degree from then Mount Union College in 1954. He met and eventually married his wife Shirley, a 1956 graduate. George would wear many hats during his time at Mount Union. Director of admissions, devoted Mount Union supporter, and even radio personality.
No matter if George had just met you or had known you for years, his impression is everlasting. In the next 15 minutes, we'll hear from faculty, staff, alumni, and students of Mount Union about how they will remember him.
George was one of a kind. He was a difference maker, and he was one of the most generous people Mount Union will ever know.
One of my most memorable moments of George is just his smile, and George being George on campus.
Dr. Otis French of the music department fondly recalls how George bonded with students.
George would always find a way to talk to every student. He and his wife would always sponsor a root beer float social for the marching band at the end of band camp. And George, during that social, would wander around and just talk to different students, and he just had this way of connecting. He had this way of making them laugh, making them listen, but I think more than anything else, it's making them feel at home. And I think he was just such a great example of Mount Union, and he was just such a great supporter of the band program and of what it meant to be Mount Union.
George could always be seen around campus. The cafeteria, though, was one of his favorite places.
I enjoyed having him in here every day. He was a great guy. He always had to have his ice cream. He liked his milk. Didn't matter where he was. If he's down the hallway, we always got it for him. He's going to be missed very much.
I would have to say one time I was in the cafeteria and I had to get to class in honestly about 5 minutes, maybe 10 or so. And I just see him kind of looking at me and he's like, "Hey, I need you real quick." And I went up to him, gave him a hug and everything, and he was like, "I want some ice cream." And I remember I helped him get himself some ice cream, and then he was like, "Well, now you got to pick somewhere for me to sit." So just taking that time just to actually help him out and just kind of sit with him, and I can't even tell you how much we laughed and everything, and even the fact that when I went into my class a little bit late, I told him I was helping George, and everyone understood completely. So it just really shows you how much of an impact he truly made here on this campus.
The most memories I have about George are when I was a freshman. Me and all my soccer girls would sit in the lunchroom, and he would always find his way to our table and talk about all the games he had been to, ask us how our classes were going, question as to why we were eating so much ice cream even though we were playing soccer. But he always had a smile on his face, and he always made our lunchtime much more enjoyable.
Longtime members of the Mount Union community reminisce about George and how he always remained truthful to himself.
George and I go back probably 10 or 12 years, and it was just always a pleasure to see him every time he walked in the door. He always brought a smile to my face.
So when he came in, I know some people frowned on it, but I enjoyed him. He was very funny. And I've known him for years because I've been here 50 years. So I've known him all that time.
Kevin Kern, director of the theater department, remembers how unique George was from the first time they met.
I met him when I was here for my job interview, and he mistook me for a student and spent a couple minutes in Beagley Hall telling me how great Mount Union was. And I said, "Sir, I beg your pardon, actually, no, Mount Union's really great. As a matter of fact, I'm trying to get a job here." And then he said to spend another couple of minutes trying to, talk me into the job, which I didn't need any talking into. And then I went down to Human Resources, and I said, "You'll have to forgive me, I'm a little flustered. I just had the craziest interaction." And before I got the word interaction out, somebody from Human Resources said, "Oh, you must have met George." And that was it.
Whether in class or around campus, George's personality stood out to many.
I love George. I think he's the sweetest little guy ever. I've seen him walk around the halls before, and he used to dress up. And I've seen him dress up as an Indian. before, and when we came back from school, he had welcome back, but he had back on his butt, so everyone would have to look at his butt. He used to come up in the office sometimes and pick on me at work. I'm going to miss him a lot.
He was just a ray of light. You know, as soon as I got to know him, I remember him coming in and almost giving me a hug the first time I met him. He was just a great, great man, and I would see him from across campus, and he'd put a smile on my face. He didn't even have to talk to me.
He was just so witty. For his age, no matter what you would say to him, he always had a really quick comeback, and he was pretty neat.
Dr. Teresa Davis of the History Department looks back at how George was such a constant presence in the community.
I've probably known George off and on almost all of my life. He's been a longtime resident of Alliance, and I've lived here all my life, and it just got to be so expected to see George walking around campus, and then walking around campus with his little walking stick, and it's going to be weird being on campus during this, especially the good weather season, and not seeing George walking around anymore. Oh, geez. That grin, that ornery grin that he'd get when especially, for example, when we had the history debates, and he'd come and sit and listen on the history debates, and someone would say something that would be a little, say naive, and he'd just get that grin on his face and kind of move his head up and down and close his eyes and smile. And I think I'm going to miss that the most, just that sort of, yeah, you have no clue kind of look on his face.
Mount Union students, faculty, and staff knew how much his show, Mount Union by George, meant to him. Everyone was always willing to be a radio star.
I have very fond memories of George from when I was in school here. He used to interview me for the radio and then sit with us at lunch. When I came back to work for Mount, George was the first familiar face I saw. He was sincere. He will be sincerely missed by all, and I will personally miss him and the familiar face on campus.
It was always great to see him approaching students and learning about their experience, caring about what they are doing on campus, how he can assist, always trying to get him on his radio show, talking to new students or incoming students, but his focus was about Mount Union and the betterment of Mount Union students.
His love for Mount Union was as clear as the smile on his face.
George was constantly happy to be on campus and to be involved in the Mount Union community. He knew all sorts of students and just was always someone who greeted you with a smile and made people feel like he really had love for this place, and I think it inspired that in others.
George's involvement with Sigma Nu was always dear to his heart.
I met George in 1990 when I was a freshman here at Mount Union. I was a Sigma Nu, and I can remember him all the time coming down to the house. I lived in the house over the summer, so he would come down there as well. He was very involved with the House Corporation at that point in time. We were fortunate in that one of our alums last year spearheaded an effort to honor George through a Sigma Nu prize that is going to be given out each year.
Whether popping into offices, classrooms, or the radio station, everyone loved to see George.
Every time that George came in to visit the staff members, it would brighten up our days. And in the main studio, we have 3 windows. Every time George walked outside, like from the outside, he would wave at me from each window, and it's just so funny. I would miss seeing George around next semester, and especially it's my last one at Mount Union, so it's going to be hard. But I just want to say that everyone will miss George a lot, and he means so much to us, even now that he's gone.
An easy guy to talk to. He always brightened your day whenever he came around, and he always. He always had fun things to say. And, he told me a couple of the same stories over and over again, but that's okay. Sometimes I think he was trying to make a point. But no, he was really a lot of fun to have around, and he used to come and sit outside my office down the hallway here. And not because he wanted to be near me, but because he could watch a lot of students go by.
George and his wife Shirley were huge supporters of everything and everyone at Mount Union.
George was one of our biggest supporters. Always at recitals, and it would surprise me to see him at so many recitals sometimes. He and Shirley both almost have their own seats And I know that I'm going to miss seeing him sitting next to her at the recitals, and I'm hopeful that she'll still come. But that was the one thing, all the recitals, it seemed like, especially faculty recitals, very supportive of our faculty performers.
Out of everything he held dear at Mount Union, his fellow Purple Raiders topped the list.
George was a great guy. His interactions with the students, he just enjoyed talking to the students, and he might ask you what your major is and everything, but he's not really that kind of, I guess, like professional conversation guy. He's more with the casual. Him and his wise jokes are the thing that I appreciate the most. He always give you a laugh. So you can be in between classes struggling or just failed the test or something, but knowing when you seen George, it was going to be a good time, a good conversation.
George was such an amazing person, always so funny and a joy to see. But besides being a funny and quirky guy, he really had a tender soul as well, really cared about everything Mount Union and especially the students on campus. He loved the students so much, every single one of them. He spoke to me about how much he enjoyed seeing them every day and talking to them every day, and how much he appreciated what they did for him, and they kept him young. George talked to us about how he thought that the young people were really the future of the world, and that they could do so many great things. And I hope that even though George is no longer with us, that his spirit will carry on in what our youth do in the future.
Dean Frazier, Dean of Students at Mount Union, emphasizes how much George will be missed.
The loss of George Weimer is a huge impact on the University of Mount Union. George was so dedicated and so loyal to his alma mater. And, from the day he graduated to the day that he died, he always had Mount Union on his mind and on his heart. And our thoughts and prayers go out to Shirley and his children and grandchildren, because it's a huge loss for the entire Mount Union family.
We hope you enjoyed this retrospective special of George Weimer's life. He no doubt left a huge footprint on this world. We leave you as George would sign off his weekly radio show. Goodbye, old friend.
And so long until the next time. Bye.